Every night, it was the same. In the small diner at the edge of Red Mesa, Clara would carry out a steaming bowl of stew for the silent stranger who always sat by the window. He ate slowly, leaving behind silver coins that gleamed brighter than anything else in town. To Clara, he was nothing more than a drifter, dust-stained and passing through. But each spoonful he lifted to his mouth cut into her memory like a blade. This was the very man who had once signed the contract that carved away safety in the silver mine, the contract that buried Samuel, her husband, along with dozens of miners. And now here he sat, living by the hands of the widow his pen had made. Was he here only to eat, to make amends, or to unlock a secret long left unspoken? When Clara reached up to snuff out the oil lamp swaying above the counter, darkness began to creep in from the corners of the empty room. The day had passed like any other. Thin bowls of stew carried off, splintered tables left untouched, and the faint smell of burnt bread still clinging to the back kitchen. Red Mesa had never been a bustling town, but in this season it felt even more hollow. Folks either chased the new railroad out east or fell beneath the silver mine before it was bled dry. And every night, it seemed, Clara remained the last light in a place that had already begun to dim. Wind pressed hard against the shutters, driving red dust through every crack like threads stitching old wounds shut. Clara sighed softly as she bolted the window. That was when it came, the familiar yet unsettling sound of hooves clattering on the wooden steps, followed by the weight of boots striking slow, steady, deliberate, as if each footfall were a nail hammered into the silence. The door opened. A man stood framed in the lamp's weak glow. His long coat was layered thick with dust, as if he'd crossed half a desert to get here. The brim of his hat shadowed most of his face, showing only cracked lips and a hard jaw dusted with uneven stubble. The smell of the trail rose off him, sweat, sand, and the lingering smoke of cheap tobacco clinging to his clothes. Clara froze. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs, a reminder of the spring before. Another drifter had stepped through that same door, weary and hollow-eyed, asking for a meal, only to draw a rusted revolver instead. She still remembered the tremor in her hands as she gripped a spoon instead of a knife, the terror as he emptied her till before being caught outside in the alley. From that night on, Clara had learned vigilance, and it rose now in her chest, taut as a drawn wire. The stranger spoke. His voice was deep, rough, but polite. "Evening, ma'am. Just a meal, and some coffee." No edge, no threat. Only the plain weight of a request. Clara hesitated, her gaze sweeping over him. Broad shoulders, but none of the swagger of a man looking for trouble. His boots were caked with miles of dust, his hands rough but held open, easy at his sides. "The cafe's closing," she said, her tone flat. "I understand." He gave a slow nod. "I won't keep long." Silence stretched between them. Clara narrowed her eyes, caught between slamming the door and granting a weary kindness. At last, she stepped aside and pointed to the table by the window. "Sit." The man inclined his head in thanks and crossed to the chair that creaked under his weight. He set his hat down, revealing thick black hair streaked with gray at the temples. The lamplight caught the lines carved deep into his face, not only the lines of years, but of roads and burdens. Clara retreated into the kitchen, ladled out the last of the stew, added 2 thick slices of cornbread. The coffee was dark and bitter, but at bon point, least it was hot. She carried the tray out and set it before him without a word. The man dipped his head, gratitude flickering briefly in his eyes. He ate slowly, as if each spoonful was a ceremony. When he lifted the cup, his calloused hand trembled slightly, holding the heat like it was something remembered from long ago. Clara busied herself at the counter, though her eyes kept straying back. There was something strange in the way he ate, not like a starving man, but like someone savoring a memory. In that moment, Clara realized she was watching him with a rare attention. Since Samuel's death, she hadn't looked at anyone with curiosity. Faces in town offered only perfunctory nods and hollow condolences. But this man, though a stranger, made her pause, made her hear the quiet sound of spoon against bowl. The room held only the whistle of wind through the shutters and the unhurried clink of his meal. Carter. That was the name he gave. Clara wasn't sure she believed it. It rang both familiar and distant, yet she asked no questions. In Red Mesa, silence was often the only way folks could stand each other's company. When the stew was gone, Carter laid his spoon down and looked up. "That's the best stew I've had in years." Clara lifted a brow. "Or you're just too hungry to tell the difference." A hint of a smile tugged at his mouth. His eyes, worn with fatigue, still shone with a quiet sincerity, not like the others who passed through, eating quick and vanishing. "How much?" he asked. 25 cents. Carter dug into his coat, pulled a small pouch. When he opened it, the sound rang out sharp and clean. Pure silver. Clara stilled. In this town, weeks might pass without a single coin like that changing hands. Yet here was this dust-covered drifter carrying a whole pouch of it. Suspicion flickered through her. Who was this man? And what kind of path had given him what the rest of Red Mesa could barely touch? Carter didn't explain. He simply placed a coin on the table, nudged it toward her. "Keep the change." Clara didn't move. The coin gleamed under the lamplight, bright as bone pulled from the earth, cold, heavy, and brimming with unspoken weight. She lifted her gaze to Carter. In her eyes there was more than caution now. There was the fragile spark of a beginning, thin as spider silk, yet enough to tremble in a town of red dust where hope had long since gone to ground. 2 years ago, on a cold October morning, Clara Whitlock received the news that her husband, Samuel Whitlock, had died in the collapse of the silver mine at Silver Vein Ridge. 6 men were buried beneath rotted beams and tons of stone. They had once been the tired but familiar faces in her cafe, men who left silver-dusted coins on the counter and weary smiles in passing. In a single moment, they were reduced to a short line in the mining company's bulletin. Workplace accident. Liability settled. The next day, a letter arrived, typed on yellowing paper, stamped with the company's blood-red seal that pressed into it like a branding iron. Inside was a check for $50, labeled standard compensation. No mention of Samuel as a man. No words of sorrow. Just a name scratched off the payroll. Clara sat for hours with that slip of paper in her hand. On the table beside her, Samuel's coffee cup still bore the cracked imprint of his lips. People told her to take the money, leave Red Mesa, and start over. But Clara did not go. Red Mesa was not only the place where Samuel had died. It was the place where he had lived, where he had dreamed of a cafe filled with laughter, where they had scrubbed battered tables together and laughed when the stew came out too salty. When the funeral ended, the town returned to its rhythm. The company kept digging, new buildings rose, and the other widows left, seeking work in larger towns. Only Clara remained, behind the counter of a failing cafe at the end of a dust-choked street, where every footstep crunched like gravel. She chose quiet labor. Each morning she swept the floors, stoked the stove, brewed strong coffee. Each noon she carried bowls of steaming stew to the few miners who stayed. Each night when the streets grew silent, she polished the gouges in the counter, as though her hand could smooth away the years of grief. To strangers, it looked like habit. But to Clara, it was survival. As long as her hands stayed busy, her heart could not splinter further. Sometimes, in the weak lamplight, Clara saw her reflection on the polished wood. The softness that once graced her face had hardened into early lines. 2 years of widowhood had turned bright eyes dim, like a lamp sputtering low. People said she was still young, that she could marry again. She only smiled thinly, shut the door of her heart tighter. Her soul had been buried in that mine with Samuel. Every corner of the cafe still carried his mark. The broken chair he'd braced with pine wood. The high shelf smeared with his leftover paint. The checkered cloth he once used to wipe his brow still hung behind the kitchen door, mute and faithful. She kept these not because she couldn't let go, but because they proved Samuel had lived, had touched this place. Outside, Red Mesa shifted. The new railroad pulled people and money elsewhere. Houses emptied, their windows shuttered like the eyes of the dead. Clara's cafe became one of the last places lit at night. Folks called it the lamp at the end of the street. Drifters stopped in, ate quick, paid, and moved on. None lingered. Sometimes people asked why she didn't sell, move somewhere else. Clara would only smile. My roots are here. And roots once deep are not easily torn free, and Samuel lived in the bricks, in the grain of the wood. To leave would be to deny his dreams. In the evenings when the sky flared red and gold over the town, Clara often stood at the window watching dust curl along the road. The dusk of Red Mesa was unlike anywhere else. Beautiful yet merciless. Beautiful in the way the light burned, merciless in its reminder that another day had passed and Samuel would never return. People grew used to the widow's presence. They nodded, sometimes dropped coins in thanks, sometimes said nothing. None crossed the distance to truly reach her. Grief had walled her off into her own quiet world, untouchable, inviolate. There were nights Clara wept, but her tears fell where no one could see, at the wash basin, hidden beneath the rush of water. Some nights, she opened a drawer and took out Samuel's letters from the mine. His handwriting trembled from weary hands, but each line was filled with hope. When the shift ends, I'll come home to your stew. We'll mend the porch, build that small horse shed. Take care of yourself. Wait for me. Those letters became Samuel's last breath in her life. In 2 years, Clara learned to live with memory. Each polished table, each seasoned stew was a whisper to him. The town could forget. The company could bury him under ledgers. But for Clara, Samuel still sat by the window, still smiled gently when she burned the bread. The world had moved on, but Clara had not. That was why, the night Carter stepped inside, it was like a stone cast across the frozen surface of her silence. She didn't yet know if he brought trouble, comfort, or another wound. But as his shadow crossed her floor, Clara knew one thing for certain. The stillness she had guarded for 2 years had just begun to crack. Clara had thought it nothing more than a passing encounter, a hungry drifter stopping to fill his stomach before vanishing again, like every dust-laden wind that swept through Red Mesa. That night, after Carter left, she cleared the tables, bolted the door, and retreated to the narrow room behind the kitchen. She slept as she always did, without lingering thoughts. Strange as he was, the man would surely never return. But the next evening, as the sun slanted gold and the red dust rose in the wind along the main road, the small bell over the wooden door rang out. The sound froze Clara mid-swipe at the counter. She looked up, and there he was. Carter stepped inside, coat still veiled in trail dust, hat brim low across half his face. He set the hat on the same table as before, sat without hesitation, as if no other seat had ever been his. Something about the gesture was so natural, so settled, that for a fleeting second, Clara felt the room had never been whole without him. And that, more than his presence itself, unsettled her. "Same hour," Clara murmured, not sure if she meant it for him or for herself. Carter lifted his gaze steady and calm. "If there's more stew like last night's, I'll take a bowl. And coffee." His tone carried no push, no pretense, simply the voice of a man used to silence and long roads. Clara tightened her grip on the rag in her hand, wondering what had drawn him back. Strangers in Red Mesa rarely lingered, never twice in a row. Regulars belonged to the townfolk, and he was clearly not one of them. Without a word, she turned to the kitchen. The smell of simmering meat mingled with the sharp tang of pine wood smoke from the stove. She ladled a portion into a bowl, set 2 slices of cornbread beside it, and carried the tray out. This time she offered no warning, no remark, just the practiced motions of habit. Carter nodded his thanks and began to eat. As before, he moved with deliberate slowness, as if every spoonful required thought. Clara lingered behind the counter, rearranging spice jars with feigned interest while her eyes followed him. What tethered a man like this to Red Mesa, to her dim cafe at this same hour? Her mind replayed the memory of the night before, the sharp clink of silver from his pouch, so unlike the tarnished coins of her usual patrons. This was no common drifter, not a pauper, yet not a gentleman trader either. He was a contradiction, a question without answer. "You travel far?" Clara asked at last. Her voice kept even. Carter looked up, eyes narrowing faintly against the lamplight. "Far. But I'm not sure I'll keep going." The words gave nothing away. Clara tilted her head, caught between doubt and curiosity. He clearly carried something unspoken, but she did not press. In Red Mesa, everyone kept secrets, and digging too deep often brought trouble. He ate on. Clara listened to the steady rhythm of spoon against bowl, a sound almost like a heartbeat in its constancy. Part of her wanted to usher him out. Just another stranger, no reason to stay. Yet another part, quiet and unexplainable, wished he might remain a little longer. Not for money, not even for company, but because his presence, in some strange way, filled the hollow no one else had touched in 2 years. Outside, the wind rose, sweeping red grit against the window panes. The last light of day filtered through, casting a streak of amber across Carter's table. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause. "This place," Carter said suddenly, voice low, "keeps the town alive." Clara startled. He had not spoken like a passing guest. He spoke like a man who had known the truth of it for years. "I just don't know how to do anything else," she answered. Carter gave a single nod and bent back to his meal. No more words, but the simple exchange stirred something inside her. A memory of Samuel, who once told her, "If the cafe still burns its light when the whole town sleeps, it means we've held back the dark a little longer." Clara swallowed the ache rising in her throat, refusing to let it show. Not before this man. When Carter finished, he set the spoon down, wiped his mouth, and looked at her. "How much?" "Same as last night, 25 cents. This time he drew out only the exact coins, stacking them neatly on the wood. No glint of silver, no strange abundance, just the common change of the town. Clara noticed, tucked the observation away, but said nothing. "Thank you," Carter said quietly. He stood, replaced his hat, and left. The bell chimed again as the door shut behind him. Clara stood still at the counter, rag still clutched in her hand, eyes on the space where he had sat. No one in Red Mesa ever returned 2 nights in a row unless they belonged there. He was different, and that difference planted something inside her. Perhaps suspicion, perhaps hope, though she dared not name it yet. That night, Clara locked the cafe, dimmed the lamp. But lying alone in the dark of her back room, she heard the bell's chime echo again and again in her mind. A sound so ordinary, and yet, for Clara, it marked a turn. Carter was no mere gust of wind. He had come back, and that meant the story was not finished. That evening's meal slipped by in silence, broken only by the scrape of spoon against bowl and the wind pushing at the shutters. Carter ate slowly, as though each mouthful was another mile he had to walk. Behind the counter, Clara polished dishes, though her eyes stayed fixed on him long after she'd forgotten to pretend at busyness. Halfway through his stew, her voice cut the quiet, hoarse, tight with restraint. "My husband died because the timbers in the shaft were rotten. He warned them, but the company said there wasn't room in the budget." The words startled even her. They burst free like a cork snapped from a bottle sealed too long. The air thickened. Carter looked up, his gaze darkening, fingers tightening around the rim of the bowl. He asked no question, offered no remark. But Clara caught the flicker of something raw behind his tired eyes, an aftershock he couldn't quite bury. The moment passed without echo, yet its weight lingered, like ash after flame. From then on, Carter didn't vanish like the other wayfarers. He returned, night after night. At first, Clara braced herself, wary, but as days passed and he never pressed, never intruded, her guard began to ease. By day, he took to small labors about the cafe. He fixed the hinge that shrieked whenever the wind hit, patched a roof tile that leaked in the early rains, carried heavy sacks of cornmeal Samuel once shouldered. Clara hadn't asked, but Carter moved through those chores as if the work were the most natural language he knew. In the evenings when the cafe stood empty, Carter often sat by the window, drinking bitter coffee in silence, and Clara, sometimes unable to bear the stillness, would fetch the small wooden box that held Samuel's letters. His handwriting wavered, smudged with coal dust, but each line bore the warmth of a man who never stopped thinking of the home he hoped to return to. One night, Clara read aloud, her voice trembling. Carter listened, motionless, never interrupting, never pitying. He only sat there, rough hand wrapped around his cup, his eyes fixed on her as though steadying the fragile sound so it would not break. She had never shared those letters with another soul. Yet under the oil lamp's flicker, Carter's silence became a frame sturdy enough to hold her grief. Once she read the letter Samuel had written in the final week before the cave-in. My love, if this mine comes down, maybe no one will hear me. But remember, I always wanted to build you a new porch, so in summer you could sit and watch the sunsets. Her voice cracked. Carter said nothing, only placed his hand flat on the table, small, sure, wordless. A presence that whispered, I hear you. I see this. Night after night, those letters became a bridge between past and present. Clara didn't know why she let him stay, why she allowed that presence inside the hollow she had kept only for Samuel. Perhaps because Carter never tried to fill it. He simply sat near, letting the emptiness remain, but less cold. The townsfolk began to notice. Some whispered that Clara's cafe now had a man's shadow about it. A few joked, half serious. Maybe Clara's found herself a replacement. She answered only with a thin, dismissive smile. No one could replace Samuel. Yet she couldn't deny that the sound of Carter's hammer on the doorframe, the thud of his boots across her floor, made the wooden walls less lonely. One afternoon, as Carter mended the fence outside, Clara glanced through the window. Golden light spilled across his shoulders, stretching his shadow long on the dirt. For a heartbeat, she saw Samuel again, bent steady to some chore, patient smile on his face. Her chest tightened, then eased. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had learned to fold in on itself, leaving room for something unnamed. Then, one evening, Carter had barely stepped through the door when a boy appeared in the frame behind him. Samuel Jr., her only son, home from the neighboring town where he boarded for school. He dropped his satchel on a chair, eyes scanning Carter, and stopped cold. Carter was lifting his hat, revealing a sun-browned face streaked with gray at the temples. The boy narrowed his gaze, searching memory. Then he tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, urgent, Ma, I've seen him. In the paper. Carson City. The article about the silver mine. I'm sure. Clara, busy with the stew pot, only nodded absently, thinking he'd mistaken him for someone else. But Samuel Jr.'s stare stayed locked on Carter, sharp with doubt, and a flicker of fear. Carter, sensing it, glanced back. For the briefest moment, something unsettled crossed his face. Then he bent his head, fussed with the dust on his boots, pretending distraction. He offered no denial, no protest. Clara didn't see it then, but in that small room a secret had been stirred, a spark trembling like fire meeting wind. The afternoon sky burned red, casting long fire across the scorched rooftops of Red Mesa. In the little cafe at the end of the street, Clara Whitlock was stacking dishes when the door burst open. Dust and heat swept in around a man whose boots struck the boards heavy, whose coat smelled of horse sweat and road grit. She didn't need a closer look to know him. Victor Hale, loathed by every shopkeeper in town, though none dared say it aloud. He pulled off one glove, dropped a thick envelope onto the counter with the weight of a stone dropped into her chest. His voice rasped, sharp as cut wire. 18 days, $210. If not, the bank takes this place. Clara's lips tightened. Her hand shook so hard she nearly dropped a glass. She forced her voice to hold steady. I've already paid some. Couldn't you give me more time? Victor smiled, thin and pitiless. The bank ain't a charity, Mrs. Whitlock. Around here, land and brick only matter in the hands of those who know how to use them. He tapped his pen against the paper, leaving a blot of black like a blade mark. Then he turned, leaving the door to slam behind him. Clara stood motionless, her eyes stinging, her heart wrenched, not only at the number 210, but at the way it carved deep into her helplessness. This cafe was all she had left of Samuel. If it slipped away, she and the children would have nothing but an empty house. Carter had been there the whole time, seated by the window. He rose when Victor left, walking slow to the counter. His calloused hand rested on the wood, steady as if lending her his strength. "I heard," he said quietly. Clara shook her head, blinking back wetness. "This is my fight. You don't need to trouble yourself." But Carter's gaze stayed locked on hers. In those dark blue eyes was something she hadn't seen in any man since Samuel, a fierce resolve braided with conscience. "Victor Hale isn't just a banker," Carter said slowly, each word pressed down like a nail. "He's a hound for bigger wolves, and if you let him take this place, it won't be long before the whole town's swallowed." Clara's chest pounded. She didn't grasp every meaning, but instinct told her his words were no bluff. The next day, the cafe felt emptier than usual. Word of her debt had slipped into the streets, carried on whispers like dust. Pitying glances, hushed talk. It weighed on her shoulders. Yet Carter came again, same hour, same table. He didn't order, just sat, eyes following her with quiet gravity. At last, when the crowd had thinned, his voice cut across the silence. "Clara, have you ever wondered if Samuel didn't die by accident?" The rag slid from her hand. The question hit like a hammer blow, splitting open the thought she had never dared to name. "What are you saying?" she whispered. Carter leaned forward, voice taut, low. "I worked at Silver Vein Ridge once. I knew Samuel. Careful man, smart. That collapse, it stank of something wrong. And Victor Hale bought into the mine only weeks after it happened." Her breath caught. Samuel's letters rushed back to her, how he had written about broken supports, about the company's neglect. She had dismissed them as bitter grumbling. Now they gleamed like puzzle pieces Carter had just set in place. A chill coursed her spine. She gripped the counter until her knuckles whitened. "If what you're saying is true, Samuel didn't just die to fate." Carter's eyes hardened, glinting cold. "Exactly. And now Hale aims to corner you the way he has others." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She spread Samuel's letters across the table, the thin paper trembling in the lamplight. In the faded ink, she noticed something overlooked. Samuel had scribbled numbers of ore shipments, dates that matched the days Victor Hale had been seen in town. Threads she hadn't tied now pulled tight. It felt as though Samuel himself still whispered through the dark, leading her toward the truth. The next morning, Carter arrived with a small canvas sack. He laid it before her. Inside, silver coins gleamed. "This is what I can raise quick. Not enough to pay the debt, but enough to buy you time." Clara shook her head, eyes burning. "I can't take it. You've done too much already." His voice was firm, unyielding. "This isn't pity, it's an investment into the truth." She froze. In that moment, Carter was no longer a drifter at her table. He was an ally. Yet the dread remained. 18 days was still a short rope. 3 days later, the first twist struck. A letter, unsigned, slipped through the cafe door. Scrawled in rough ink, it read, "If you want to know who truly stood behind Samuel's death, look in the old land records at Town Hall. But beware, Hale's eyes are everywhere." Clara read it, her heart lurching. She handed it to Carter. His mouth curved faintly, eyes flashing as though he had expected this. "Someone out there wants you to know, Clara. We're not alone." She clutched the note as if it were a lantern lit against the dark. For the first time since Samuel's grave was sealed, her chest burned with something beyond grief. Hope, sharp-edged and fierce, rising with resolve. That night, Red Mesa lay sunk in a darkness thick as tar. Desert wind shrieked against rusted tin roofs, clawed at the window frame of the boarding room where Carter sat hunched. On the rickety table, an oil lamp quivered, its yellow glow dancing over the worn edges of his face. He opened a leather-bound ledger, corners frayed, the cover stamped with cold letters, C&H Mining Kosu. His fingers turned the brittle pages, each crack of paper like a bone snapping. Neat lines of ink stared back at him, merciless. Assets reduced 48% after incident. Consolidate and acquire. Carter's eyes froze on the final entry, where the ink burned like judgment. The signature of Jonathan Carter Sinclair. His own hand. His own choice. He had traded safety for profit. Signed away the lives of the men underground. Samuel Whitlock among them. His breath snagged. For years he had carried this ledger like both evidence and curse. He thought he'd grown calloused to its weight. But Clara's face rose in memory, frail, weary, brown eyes shimmering, and the ink seemed to sear his skin. He snapped the book shut, set it down hard. His hand trembled against his temple as though to chase off the echoes, miners screaming in darkness, timbers splintering, rock crushing pleas into silence. He had been at Silver Vein Ridge that day, not with the men, but on the ridge above, standing beside the directors. They told him delaying repairs would save cost, and when the mountain gave way, he signed the merger papers, acquired the land for pennies. Profits soared. Carter Sinclair's reputation hardened. Now all that renown was ash. He opened the book again. A folded paper slipped free, fluttering to the floor. Carter stooped, lifted it, and felt the blood drain from his face. A deed transfer. Samuel's land, stripped from his widow in the haze of grief. And the signature at the bottom, black and final, was his own. He stared at it for hours, unable to touch the page again. For the first time, the old excuse, that business was never personal, rang hollow. Now it was nothing but personal. Providence itself seemed to have thrown him into Clara's path, to face the ruin his pen had made. Outside, Red Mesa slept, save the distant cry of a horse. Carter poured cheap whiskey, swallowed it down, then stared into the cracked mirror on the wall. The man who looked back bore graying hair, shadowed eyes, a face carved by guilt. He was no longer Sinclair of the boardrooms, just a fugitive in a shabby room haunted by ghosts. A knock at the door jolted him. He shoved the ledger into his coat. The innkeeper called softly. A letter had arrived from the stagecoach office. Carter frowned, but took it. The seal bore Silver Vein's mark. His hands shook as he tore it open. Inside, Hale's neat, slanted script unfurled like poison. Dear Mr. Sinclair, all is proceeding as planned. The widow has 18 days. If you wish to close matters swiftly, I will proceed with foreclosure and auction immediately after deadline. Kindly confirm final order. Carter's jaw clenched, teeth grinding. So Hale still believed him the old Sinclair, the cold financier who crushed the weak without blinking. But something in Clara's eyes, in the letters of Samuel she read aloud, had cracked that iron mask. He crumpled the letter, tossed it into the lamp flame. It curled, blackened, fell to ash. Yet the fire in his chest only rose higher. The night stretched endless. Carter did not sleep. Instead, he wrote. Not in the company's ledger, but in his own worn notebook. The first line staggered, heavy. If there is a man who deserves the sentence, it is me. But Clara must never know, not bear this weight on top of all the rest. He wrote, crossed out, wrote again. Each word like stone, but the only way to breathe. At cockcrow, he shut the book, slid it into his inner coat. The road ahead forked only two ways: confess everything or atone in silence. Neither promised mercy. The next morning he returned to Clara's cafe. Sunlight poured through the windows. Silverware clinked soft in the quiet. Clara wiped down tables, her dark hair tied back, her face still shadowed by weariness. When she saw him, surprise flickered, then faded into a small nod. He sat at his usual table. She set before him a steaming cup of coffee without asking, the habit now ingrained. Carter watched her hands move, remembered his signature on Samuel's stolen deed. Ink and flesh, cold black strokes on paper, warm fingers scrubbing wood to keep a family alive. No amount of meals could bridge that gulf. Clara laid down a bundle of letters, bound in cloth. Her voice low, almost hesitant. Would you like to hear the next one? The sound of it pulled him back from the edge of his torment. He nodded. And that evening, as Clara read Samuel's trembling words into the lamplight, Carter sat still, each line striking like a verdict passed straight into his heart. But when he left, the ledger of his sins still rode in his coat, and he knew it would not stay buried forever. One windless evening, the oil lamp in Clara's cafe threw a thin yellow glow against the wooden wall, a wall already steeped with years of sorrow. On the counter, Carter laid down a thick envelope, aged paper, edges still stiff. Clara froze, her eyes fixed on it, as though the fragile layer of paper might hold a truth she wasn't ready to touch. This, Carter's voice rasped, is the exact sum you owe. $210, principal and interest. Clara didn't reach for it. Instead, she stepped back, her spine pressing against the shelf of old pottery. She drew in a breath, words slow, as if afraid she'd misheard. Who are you really? Carter said nothing. For once, his eyes, usually evasive, held hers, deep, dark, fathomless. And for the first time, Clara saw not a weary traveler, but an abyss of secrets. Just a man in debt to the past, he answered, voice low enough to sink into the floorboards. Clara's fingers clenched her apron, her heart hammering. Since Samuel's death in the mine, she had learned to recognize the sound of money, the clink of coins, the cold recitation of numbers from the bank. But this envelope carried something else. The stench of guilt, not salvation. What do you know about Samuel? She blurted, her voice trembling. Carter didn't answer right away. He sank into his familiar chair, pulled a cigarette but didn't light it. His fingertips quivered, the smallest crack in his rigid shell. He filed complaints, Carter said at last. I read them all. I remember the handwriting, smudged with coal dust. But the company didn't listen. Or rather, I chose not to listen. The room stiffened to stone. Clara moved closer, her eyes aflame. You worked for the mine company? He nodded faintly. More than worked. I sat at the head table. My true name is Jonathan Carter Sinclair. The name dropped into the narrow room like a blade. Clara heard it but took a moment to understand. Then memory caught. Samuel's letters. His warnings dismissed. The same name scrawled at the bottom of forms. The signature that had turned her husband's pleas into farce. Blood surged hot in her face. She seized the envelope, slammed it hard on the counter until dust puffed into the lamplight. You think tossing a handful of money wipes it away? Samuel's dead, and I've been left to scrape life together for our children. You're the man who signed it all away. Carter didn't flinch. Shoulders sagged, as though shackled by unseen chains. You're right. I am contemptible. But I didn't come to buy forgiveness. I came because I can't bear knowing I destroyed a decent family. I haven't slept since that day. Clara laughed. Dry, sharp, bitter. The sound iced the room. Can't sleep? Samuel lost his life, the miners lost their work, and you complain of sleepless nights? Take your money back. She hurled the envelope at him. It slid from the counter, spilled, open on the floor, neat bundles of bills flashing under the lamp like cruel bait. Carter bent, gathered them slowly, knuckles whitening. He didn't argue, didn't insist. After a pause, he placed the envelope on the counter again. Whether you take it or not, the bank will come. I don't ask forgiveness. I just can't stand watching this cafe vanish, like the families I've already buried under contracts. Clara stood rigid, torn between two fires, fury at the man who had signed Samuel's death warrant, and fear for her children, Lydia and Jacob, who still needed shelter. In her mind, she saw Samuel's eyes, his rough hands, heard his words before that final shift. If anything happens to me, keep the cafe. It's our home. Keep the cafe. The phrase tolled in her skull like a bell, and the envelope, dirty, blood-stained though it felt, was the only key left. She sagged into a chair, breath uneven. I will never forgive you, Carter Sinclair. Not ever. But I can't let my children end up on the street. I'll keep this money as a debt repaid. Nothing more. Carter dipped his head, lips pressed thin. No relief, no smile, only the bowed acceptance of a sentence. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks, carrying desert grit. Inside, two souls sat across a gulf, one bearing guilt, the other grief. Between them lay the envelope of money, a wound that would never close. That night, Clara did not sleep. She sat at the table, Samuel's old letters spread beside the bundle of cash. Faded ink and fresh bills. One the voice of a love long gone, the other an unwanted attempt at atonement. In their contrast, she saw the truth. She had entered a different war, one to keep the cafe, to guard Samuel's memory, and to cling to her own dignity. Carter left before dawn. He spoke no more, did not look back. Only his footsteps dragged down the dirt road, fading into the dark. From the window, Clara watched. She couldn't know if he would return or vanish for good. But she knew this. The money was not an ending, only the beginning of a longer reckoning, where pain and truth had yet to be unearthed. Carter swallowed hard, breath snagging in his throat. My name, Jonathan Carter Sinclair. In that instant, the little room seemed to cave in. The oil lamp wavered, its light shuddering across the walls, pressing the air down heavy. Clara froze, the rag in her hand slipping to the floor, leaving a dark stain of water across the boards. "Sinclair?" Her voice shook, barely cutting through the suffocating stillness. Her brown eyes, always heavy with weariness, now flared wide, ripped open with raw pain. "My husband died by your signature." Carter stepped forward, hands spread as if to reach for something long lost. But every word he spoke cut sharper than steel. I didn't know who Samuel was when I signed. All I saw were numbers. I regret it. Every single day." Clara shook her head, her gaze cold as ice. "Regret?" Her voice cracked, fury and grief colliding. "You sat here, ate food from my hands, listened while I read Samuel's letters, when you were the man who signed his death. Do you know what it was? To sit through nights beside his lifeless body, to answer when my children asked, 'Where's Papa?'" Each word struck Carter down like a hammer blow. His chest tightened, breath stolen, as though he'd taken the punch full force. "Clara," he began, but she cut him with a scream that tore the silence apart. "Get out! Now!" The cry slammed against the wooden walls, heavy as an executioner's mallet. Carter stumbled back, his vision blurred. He could not tell where the lamp's glow ended and his own tears began. His hand brushed the envelope of money on the counter, but Clara snatched it and hurled it to the floor. "I don't want your blood money." He stood in stillness, then turned away. The door shut behind him, wind tearing in, cold enough to flay the skin. Clara collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Her heart pounded, each beat like a hammer striking deep. Memory rushed in, a letter Samuel had sent only days before the cave-in, one she had never dared to read aloud. She stumbled to the wooden box by her bed, fumbling through until her fingers found the yellowed envelope, edges frayed. Samuel's handwriting scrawled in haste across the front. "Clara, keep safe." By the lamp's glow, she unfolded it. The words leapt like fire. "The man named Sinclair is pressing the foreman to cut supports, to save cost. I don't trust them. If anything happens, Clara, know it was not chance. It was greed." The paper shook in her grasp. Tears fell, not only for sorrow, but for the cruel twist. The very man Samuel had warned her of had sat in her kitchen, listening to the same letters, word by word. She felt betrayed again, not by fate this time, but by her own blind trust. Outside, Carter trudged through the night fog, his steps dragging as if under a mountain's weight. Clara's cry rang in his skull, every syllable slicing him raw. He thought of his father, Henry, Sinclair, the man who had built an empire of mines on the backs and blood of the poor. Jonathan, once just a boy behind the great oak desk, learning how to sign paper after paper. He had never stepped into the shafts, never smelled coal sweat in the dark. He saw only profit, until the day he realized his own hand had signed away lives. For years, he had sought atonement, yet the wound only festered. And now, hearing Clara spit Samuel's name, seeing the ruin in her eyes, he understood. No money, no deed, could cleanse it. Back in the cafe, Clara clutched Samuel's letter. Her children stirred at her sobs. Lydia and Jacob hurried to her side, wrapping arms around their mother. "Mama, what's wrong?" Lydia's voice trembled. Clara held them tight, slipping the letter behind her. "Nothing, my darlings. I just miss your father." But inside she knew the truth was no longer buried. Samuel had seen it coming. His death had not been chance, and the man he had named had stood in their home. The night bled on. Clara sat alone by the dwindling lamp. Memories of Carter's silent help, his hands on broken hinges, his eyes steady as she read aloud, clashing with the revelation of his name. Could remorse live beside guilt so vast? Or had it all been a disguise? The question hung in the air, heavier than the winter wind outside. At dawn, Clara sat by the window, Samuel's letter still on the table. Her children slept, cheeks flushed from cold. She smoothed their hair, and in her chest something hardened. She could not let Samuel's warning vanish in silence. This letter was proof, and no matter the danger, she would not be silent. If she stayed quiet, Samuel's death would remain nothing more than a line in a ledger, an expense written in ink instead of blood. She gripped the paper, eyes red but burning with a new light. Not only grief, but fire. Across town, Carter sat in his room, the company ledger open before him. Each line now bled red in his sight. His own name signed in black ink appeared as if written in blood. A thought rose fierce in him. If he could not erase the past, he would have to face it. But how? When the woman he longed to save now despised him to her core? He dropped his head into his hands, shoulders trembling. For the first time in years, Jonathan Carter Sinclair felt stripped bare. No wealth, no power, only the truth seeping from him like a wound. Outside, the sun broke the horizon. Snowmelt dripped from the eaves, pattering into silence. Clara stepped out with Samuel's letter in her hand. She knew the road ahead would be brutal, but at least the truth no longer slept. And somewhere in town, Carter knew it too. His secret was no longer his alone. It had become flame, and it would burn them both. 3 days later, the sky above Red Mesa tore open. Black clouds churned, wind screamed along the ridges, lashing red dust into a storm that swallowed the valley whole. The tempest was not only of the heavens, but of men's hearts. Jonathan Carter Sinclair drove his horse hard through the main square, rain plastering his coat to his back, his eyes cold as iron. Townsfolk on either side stared, whispering. When had the wealthy magnate begun to look like a hunted man? The horse skidded to a halt before Hale and Cumberland Bank. Carter dismounted, boots soaked, each step striking the floor like a hammer as he strode inside. Victor Hale, bent over his ledger, started at the sight of him, but before words could form, Carter threw a bundle of rain-soaked papers onto the desk. Dissolve every Sinclair holding in Red Mesa. Return the land. Wipe the debts, now. His voice rasped, weary but edged with steel. Victor raised his brows, lifting a sheet beneath the lamp. The crimson seals of Sinclair Holdings glared back unmistakable. He looked up, lips curling. Do you know what you're saying? An order like this buries your fortune, erases Sinclair's name. Better that than letting it keep burying men, Carter ground out. You think I don't know? I signed those orders. I made Red Mesa a graveyard for miners. Today it ends. Victor smirked. Ends. Or is it penance? He tapped his pen against the desk. What are you trying for, Carter? A shred of honor? Or is it the widow Whitlock? The name struck like a fist to his chest. Carter stiffened. He hadn't spoken it, but Victor had seen straight through. Victor chuckled. A widowed woman, a failing cafe. You'll throw Sinclair's fortune under her roof? Not mine, Carter said evenly. Theirs, Samuel Whitlock's land, Clara's debt, and dozens of families besides. You will return every acre, every home. And if I refuse? Victor leaned back, eyes gleaming with contempt. Carter drew his Colt, laid it on the desk, barrel aimed at the papers. Then the whole town hears the truth. I've nothing left to lose, Victor. You, on the other hand. The rain battered the windows like fists. For a long moment, Victor said nothing, only studied him. Then he lowered the pen, scratching his name across the deeds, each stroke cutting the page deep. So be it, but you'll carry the ruin left behind. I want no part in your madness. Carter gathered the papers, turned, but Victor's voice slid after him, cold as the rain. You think she'll forgive? You signed her husband's death. No envelope of money will buy that back. Carter faltered, but did not turn. I don't ask forgiveness. I ask only that she and her children keep a home. And with that, he stepped into the storm. News spread swift. Within days, Red Mesa buzzed. The bank had returned land. Debts were forgiven. Clara Whitlock's cafe spared foreclosure. Some whispered that Carter, once cursed, had, en toi, become a savior. But to Clara, every mention of his name sliced her heart. She remembered Samuel. She remembered that damned signature. That night, wind shrieked round the cafe. Clara sat by the hearth, clutching Samuel's last letter, the one that bore the warning, "Beware, Sinclair." Tears fell, smudging the ink. She whispered, "You were right, Samuel, but you'll never see this day." Jacob and Lydia slept soundly in their room, freer now than they had been in weeks. Clara knew Carter had made that possible, but that truth only deepened her torment. Benefactor and betrayer. How could she separate them? The storm raged 2 days, scouring the valley clean, laying bare old wounds. Carter sheltered in a cabin on the edge of town, keeping distance from the cafe. He knew Clara wasn't ready to face him. Passing by, he left small bundles, firewood, dried meat, quietly at her door before walking away. Clara saw, but said nothing. He understood. Redemption was not an act, but a lifetime's burden. And perhaps in this lifetime, he would bear the name Sinclair as a scar that never healed. One morning, as the rain broke, Clara stepped onto her porch. Carter stood a few yards off, soaked, hollow-eyed from sleepless nights. In his hand was the signed decree. Her debt erased, her land restored. He set it on the step. His voice rasped. "It's done. This cafe will always be yours, and your children's." Clara gave no reply, only looked at him, her eyes a storm of their own. Carter dipped his head, turned, and walked into the fog. The tale spread farther. People began to look on Carter differently, but he cared nothing for their judgment. For him, all that remained was Clara and her silence. That night he sat alone, scratching in a new notebook. No longer Sinclair Holdings at the top, only jagged lines. Give it back, piece by piece. Redeem every soul. Each word carved into himself as much as into the page. The storm had broken over Red Mesa, but the true storm, in Clara's heart, in Carter's, had only just begun. Word traveled faster than the wind through Red Mesa's valley. Folks said debts were cleared, seized lands returned, and the school now had funds to patch its leaky roof. In the saloon, cowhands nodded over their glasses. In the church, The preacher spoke Carter's name as though it were some strange wonder, how a man once despised had done what no one dared. Yet in Clara's cafe there was no sign of him, no boot prints, no smoke from his cheap tobacco, clinging to that familiar corner table. He had slipped from the town's gaze, taking shelter in an abandoned way station along the old trail to the coal mines. It was the very place Samuel once dreamed of restoring into a stop for traders and pack trains, a dream buried with him beneath the rock. Now Carter sat in the ruins of another man's dream, as if guarding the grave of his own sins. Each morning, before the sun touched the peaks, the sound of hammering rose from the station. Carter worked alone, patching the roof, setting new posts, hauling timber on his own shoulders. Sweat darkened his shirt. Blood streaked his knuckles where nails bit. No one came to help, nor to stop him. Perhaps they were wary. Perhaps they could not yet believe that the man who brought ruin to the mine could truly change. Clara first heard of it from the milk boy. He swore he'd seen a tall, gray-haired man swinging a hammer on the way station roof like some worn-out carpenter. Her heart clenched, torn between turning away and needing to know. That night, with the wind clawing at her shutters, she pulled from her chest the letter Samuel had written, the one whose smudged, coal-stained words carried his last warning about Sinclair. She had never read it aloud, as if silence could keep fate at bay. But now truth stood before her in the shape of Carter, a man both sinner and strange savior. On the third day, Clara went. She left Lydia and Jacob behind, locking the cafe tight. The path to the station was rough, weeds choking the ruts, broken wagon wheels rotting in the dust, ghosts of the bustle that once was. By the time she arrived, the afternoon sun spilled over a roof half-mended. The hammering stopped. Carter, high on the rafters, looked down. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, his hands raw and bleeding. His face was gaunt, but his eyes burned with a strange, clear light. Clara stood still, fist tight around Samuel's letter hidden in her dress. "What are you doing here?" Her voice wavered, but did not break. Carter descended the ladder slow, wiping his brow. Finishing Samuel's dream. He wanted this place rebuilt, for travelers to rest, for the children to sell their bread and earn coin for the school. I found his sketches. I owe him this much. Clara's throat tightened. Rage rose but faltered at the sight before her. This was no cold magnate cloaked in wealth. This was a haunted man, trying to mend with his own hands what he himself had shattered. Her gaze fell on a desk inside the Sundown station. Papers lay neatly stacked. She stepped forward, lifted the top sheet. The words leapt clear. Deed of transfer, new owner, Samuel Carter Whitmore, Jr. Her breath caught. Samuel, Jr., her boy asleep at home, was now named the rightful heir of this ground. Clara turned to Carter, astonished. "You?" Her voice broke. "Why would you do this?" Carter lowered himself onto a bench, staring at his scarred hands. "Because I cannot give back a life, but I can give back a future. Your boy will grow knowing his father's name wasn't buried under debt, but carved into the doorway of a dream." Outside, the wind rose, red dust twisting into small whirls. Clara's chest ached, torn between fury and an ache she dared not name. Samuel's face rose in her mind, his smile, his words about this way station, about the children. Tears spilled, hot and unbidden. Carter did not move closer. He only watched, silent, as though each swing of his hammer, Each line of ink on those papers was his only plea. "You think this is enough?" Clara's voice cracked through her tears. Carter gave a small nod. "Enough that I can face my own reflection. Forgiveness, that is not mine to claim." There they stood, beneath the half-finished roof, a widow scarred by loss, a sinner stripped of titles, both staring at the chasm between them. Between them lay a wall built of signatures and blood, yet also between them sprouted a seed. Samuel Jr., the boy bearing his father's name, now holding the deed to a beginning. Clara turned away, skirts whipping in the wind as she stepped from the station. She did not look back, but the image burned into her. Carter bent to his work, hammer in hand, fighting to raise from ruin what once collapsed. Not the destroyer of her family, but a man striving, with every blow, to lift what had fallen. And Red Mesa, that evening, held its breath. The hush of a town freed from its chains, the hush of a widow seeing her old enemy shoulder her burden, the hush of a fallen magnate stooping low, driving nails into a dream that was never his. The wind screamed through the gaps in the old station's frame, each raindrop pounding the new planks like a drumbeat, urging on a judgment that could no longer be delayed. Clara stood ankle-deep in mud, her shoes soaked, her dress stained dark with rain. In her trembling hand was the deed, the name Samuel Jr. carved upon it like a blade, both tender and merciless. Carter stood across from her, hair plastered to his forehead, dark and dripping. He made no effort to shield himself, no excuse upon his lips. His eyes were hollow, red-rimmed from nights without sleep, carrying the same refrain over and over, "Make it right, at any cost." But to Clara, every nail he drove, every board he raised, only bled the old wound deeper. She lifted the deed high, her voice cutting through the storm. "You think this makes it clean? One signature, half a roof? Do you think that buys back the past?" Carter drew a heavy breath, fingers tightening around the hammer still in his grip. His voice cracked like gravel underfoot, low and raw. "No, nothing can wipe it clean. But this is the only way I know. To rebuild what I destroyed." Clara laughed, a sound brittle, choked with grief. She spun, pointing at the patchwork beams, the crooked posts. "Rebuild? Do you know how many times Samuel stood right here, dreaming of shelter for the men cast out of the mines, for the children without fathers? And you, what did you do, Carter? You signed your name. You took their lives. And now you expect me to believe a few boards can replace 100 cold graves?" The rain lashed harder, drowning her words as soon as they left her lips. But Carter did not waver. He dropped the hammer, stepped closer, voice honed to a blade's edge. "I remember every face. Your Samuel was the only man bold enough to defy Sinclair. I watched him fall, and I let it happen. I cannot mend that moment, Clara, but I can write his name on every deed, raise his dream from the dirt, give the children back the chances Sinclair stole." Clara's grip tightened, tears mixing with rain until the ink blurred on the page. "And what good is that? Samuel is gone. You're the one still breathing." The storm howled through the skeletal rafters. At last Carter lifted his head, steel glinting in his gray eyes. "Exactly. I'm the one left alive, so I carry it. Every day I choose not to run, not to hide in the shadows like the rest of them. Hate me if you must, Clara. You've every right. But know this, I am not running." Her breath caught. In his eyes she saw no arrogance, no trace of the man who once signed lives away from behind a polished desk. Only something bare, raw, remorse, torment, and a plea unspoken. Lightning split the sky, white fire across the rain. For a heartbeat, Carter's gaunt, weathered face was stark as stone, unyielding. Clara staggered back, clutching her skirt, her voice breaking. "You don't understand. Samuel's death didn't just take my husband. It stole my faith in justice, in everything. And now you stand here asking me to believe you've changed. Carter, you are the last scar of everything that buried me." Carter bent, picked up the hammer again, and drove a nail home with a sound sharp as gunfire. The echo filled the storm, a heartbeat against the fury. He offered no defense, only the rhythm of labor. "I will keep building, even if you turn away." Clara's anger flared, yet some strange current tugged within her chest. She would not forgive, could not soften, but she could not deny it either. The man before her was no coward fleeing the wreckage he made. He stayed, in the storm, under her hatred, working like a penitent chained by choice. A sudden gust ripped a plank loose, sending it crashing toward Clara. In an instant, Carter lunged, pulling her clear. They fell hard into the mud, rain exploding around them. Clara pushed against him, ready to shove away, but froze at the sight of his eyes, dark with fear, but not for himself. Time stopped. The storm roared, the wind screamed, yet between them the distance closed, suffocating and undeniable. Her voice shook. "Why, Carter? Why do all this, so I'll forgive you?" He shook his head, water dripping from his hair, his breath ragged. "No, not forgiveness. Only, so Samuel won't have died for nothing." Clara's eyes shut tight, her heart torn apart. Memories flooded. Her husband's face, the miners' weary smiles, a town clinging to life. And now, in the freezing rain, the man who had damned them all was hammering each board like a prayer for their ghosts. She rose unsteadily, thrust the deed back into his hands, her voice hoarse but steady. "I cannot speak for Samuel, but if you mean to prove yourself, finish this. Not with paper, not with half a roof. Build it into a place the children can truly call home. On that day, I will look at you again." Carter's hands shook as he took the deed, as though it were both verdict and reprieve. He nodded once, fierce, rain hiding the tears that slipped with it. The storm raged on, but in that drenched clearing, two souls stood facing one another, not just sinner and bereaved, but survivors bound in the same tempest, forced to carve a way through it together. Instead of turning away, Clara opened the wicker basket, her hands still faintly trembling. Inside lay a loaf of bread, still warm with its soft fragrance, and a piece of roasted chicken wrapped neatly in linen. She set them down upon the rickety table Carter had braced with an old crate. No words of thanks passed, no polite invitation. Yet when the scent of chicken filled the hollow station, two souls once standing on opposite cliffs sat down together, because sometimes even an ordinary meal could serve as a bridge. The fire Carter coaxed from damp wood smoked sharp into their eyes, but its glow across Clara's face lent the moment an unexpected warmth. She broke the loaf in two, placed half before him. Carter hesitated, then accepted. The bread was dry, the chicken cooled quickly in the night air, but neither cared. In the silence of Red Mesa, with the wind scouring the broken roof and the wood snapping faintly, They ate like those too weary to keep up their armor any longer. No mention of forgiveness. Not once was the word love spoken. They talked instead of the porch that needed painting, of the missing timber for the horse shed, of the cracked well that would need sealing. They spoke of raising the station into the shape Samuel once dreamed. Benches for weary riders, stalls to shelter horses from storm, and a small schoolroom down the hall. Clara smiled faintly when she spoke of the children, and for a breath, it sounded like hope. Carter listened, his eyes once shadowed with ruin now flickering with something gentler. He was no longer Sinclair, no longer the man of ledgers and seals, but someone fumbling to relearn life among people. Each time Clara named Samuel, Carter stilled, yet he did not flinch away. He only let his calloused hands tighten, then loosen again, his own way of bearing a wound that would never truly close. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall. Not a storm, but soft flakes drifting down, like a promise not yet spoken. They powdered the half-roof, slid from the broken eaves, touched the frozen ground before melting slow. Clara glanced upward, watching the snow vanish as it kissed the fire, and in her chest stirred something unfamiliar. The sense of a beginning, fragile, but real. When supper ended, Clara gathered the basket but did not rise to leave. She traced her fingers along the split grain of the table. Carter saw, and in his rough voice promised to fetch more lumber by morning to measure tiles for the roof. Clara gave a wry smile, telling him he was a fool to think he could manage alone. For a fleeting instant, their talk of nails and shingles carried the air of two people once more building a home together. There were no vows exchanged, yet the silence itself carried more weight than any flowery oath. Carter sat bent low in the cramped room, his broad shoulders seeming smaller, more human. Clara looked on, her heart still torn raw, but unable to deny the strange peace that flickered from the fire, from the gentler wind beyond the walls. As the flames dimmed, Carter rose to lay on more wood. His shadow stretched long across the wall, wavered, then folded into the fire's restless glow. Clara drew her shawl tight, and for the first time in months, she did not feel the cold gnaw down to her bones. Perhaps it was the fire. Perhaps it was the presence of someone standing there, patient, silent. That night, no past was spoken. They spoke only of tomorrow, of a station that could become real shelter for the weary, of a porch broad enough for children to play beneath the rain, of a hearth strong enough to dry the coats of travelers. And in every small detail, Clara understood. No promise was needed. Only a beginning, however delicate. Beyond the walls, the snow kept falling, soft as if to cover old footprints, laying down a new road in white, untrodden, but ready for two to walk. For in the Wild West, love was never born from gilded words, but from simple meals, from scarred hands unafraid of labor, and from the courage to try once more, even after a heart has been broken. And if this tale stirs an old memory in you, an evening spent at a humble table with those you love, share a word below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment, so together we can keep the fire of these Wild West love stories burning bright in memory.